For this next session of the Widening the Pipeline Fellowship, we're going to be joined by one of the most popular speakers of year one of the program. Michael Bolden is the CEO and Executive Director of the American Press Institute. I asked him to join us last year to talk about the bubbling conversation around local news and what was happening in the country in terms of the erosion of local news, etc. Michael led us on a wide-ranging, insightful conversation, but I think the point that many of the people invoked in their evaluations of his session was his discussion of developing an advisory group for your life and for your career. It resonated with me because quite literally I would not be sitting here if I did not have a collection of people who I could trust to tell me not just what I wanted to hear, but what I needed to hear when it came to the decisions that I made in my life and career. And so Michael's insights are going to, I think, do the same thing for you this year. And we are very fortunate and grateful that he's taken time out of his schedule to join us today. So thank you so much, Michael, for being here.
Well, I'm always glad to be here, Rachel. I'm a proud supporter of the National Press Foundation and its work. I look out at all of you and I just see the promise of this industry. So spending time like this is something that I actually relish. I tell people all the time now that I'm a bureaucrat. I sign things. I sign checks and I sign contracts. But so when I actually get to talk about the journalism and the industry and the effect that you can have no matter where you are, no matter where you are in your careers, that's something that I just thoroughly enjoy. So.
You know, the first time we ever talked on Zoom, we talked about, the way things were certainly when I started in 1986 and you afterwards. But let me ask you to take your temperature of where things stand today for a 25, 26-year-old journalist of color in a newsroom. What do they have to be hopeful about? What do they need to consider? Let's start off right there.
Yeah, so I am actually very hopeful about the industry. I think that we are at a moment where, despite what you hear about layoffs and cuts and all of those things, there has never been as much promise. And you know this in your everyday lives, right? Just in how you use media, where you obtain your news and information from, the things you do in both your professional lives and your personal lives. At no time in history has so much information been available to so many frankly, with as few barriers as we have now. Even go back 20 years, 30 years, go back to the 50s and the height of the civil rights movement and how information has often been held by gatekeepers and information has been democratized. Now, that is not to say that there aren't barriers to access, because they are. Some of them are technological in nature. Some of them have to do with issues of equity. Some of them have to do with other things, including geography. But we are at this precious moment where we have the potential of informing more people about what they need to know than we ever have before. And we've seen movements happen around the world, right, where it's been because people have had access to information. So that in and of itself makes me hopeful. And when I look out across the room, I was looking at the names of the organizations that you represent. And some of the organizations are old stalwarts, right? The Courier Journal, Austin American Statesman, PBS NewsHour. Politico has actually become a stalwart, but it's not that old, right? Capital B News, Lauren Williams, the work you all are doing, it's absolutely fantastic, and they're relatively new. And so just think about that, how the landscape is shifting and changing, and we have these organizations that didn't exist in the past where people had been shut out in many cases. So that makes me extremely hopeful, and I think that you all should take hope from that because it's just something that we have not had in the media in this country. So.
Tell us about your personal history and your journey in media, in newsrooms.
Yeah, well, I would actually back up a minute because, and it's only as I've gotten older that I've realized where my journey actually started, right? So I grew up in the Deep South, Mobile, Alabama. I tell people there is nothing more Deep South than that. It's also the original home of Mardi Gras. I have to get that in, even though it's Ash Wednesday, but I have to get that in. And my father actually had a 6th grade education. And he was a devoted media consumer. He would sit in his recliner every day, and he'd get his paper out of the yard, sit in that recliner, and read the paper cover to cover, often while watching the news, CNN, the local news, whatever. So here was a man who had largely educated himself and realized the importance of having news and information, accurate news and information, so that he could vote, so that he could make good decisions that affected our lives. And I think that actually, if I am honest about it, inspired me to go into media. In high school, I worked on the school paper, I worked on the yearbook. We had a relationship with the local CBS affiliate, so I did a youth magazine. And so that was kind of my start. But I really owe my father, and my mother too, who was one of those people who did the crossword in pen, which I just, my mind still blows at the thought of it. But really, it's because of them that I went into this field. And one of the things that I learned early on probably was the power of both serendipity and being open to things. Because I had this idea, I'd be a reporter, I'd be an editor, et cetera, et cetera. I'd follow this path. And one of the first things I discovered, I did an internship at the New Orleans Times-Picayune, a reporting internship. And at the end of that internship, they wanted to hire me to be a reporter. I had done government reporter on the West Bank, which is across the Mississippi River. Because New Orleans is bisected, right? A lot of people don't know that. But there are also communities over there. But so I'd done an internship on the West Bank. I'd done one for New Orleans city government. And the Times-Picayune wanted to hire me at the end of that. But they didn't have any reporting positions. So they said, if you're willing to do a tryout on the universal copy desk, maybe we can hire you there. And I was like, it's still all new to me. I'm like, copy editing, copy desk. I don't know exactly what they do, but I'll give it a shot. So I did the tryout, and they were like, oh, we'll hire you. You're great at this. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I did that. And that was my first professional newspaper job. Which sort of exposed me to a side of the business that I really had not engaged with before. And in those days, it was still, print, and we were paginating and that sort of thing. But it taught me that there was more to this world that I needed to learn about, right? And so I went from there to a paper in the Florida Panhandle called the Northwest Florida Daily News. Where I went on to become bureau chief in Destin. If you've ever visited the Gulf Coast there, you know what the beaches in Destin look like. I was the bureau chief, which was my first foray into really being a manager and helping to coach other people. I went from there to the Miami Herald, where I really learned the power of knowing how things work, right? Because one of my responsibilities became being in charge of production for all of the feature sections. And that was like, they had a daily living and art section, a food section. They did a Sunday art section. And I was the person who, because I was good at organizing things, I was in charge of orchestrating everything, deadlines and production schedules and relationships that we had with advertising. Which was something that people who just wanted to be reporters, that they had no interest in. But it fascinated me because I was like, there was this entire layer of the business that I thought was important to know about. And keeping that in mind, it really just sort of prepared me for the rest of my career. What ended up happening there, I got a call one day from someone at the Washington Post asking if I would like to try out for a job at the Washington Post. Now, the backstory behind this is there used to be a time when the Miami Herald was considered the farm team for the Washington Post. There were lots of people who went from the Miami Herald to the Washington Post. That was just the way it was. You did your dues at the Miami Herald, and then people who had gone up would call and say, oh, so-and-so, do you want to try out? That doesn't happen anymore, but that just used to be the way that it was. And I went to the Washington Post, and that's where I spent the bulk of my career in news organizations. I was an assistant news editor in style. I became an editor in the Washington Post magazine, in charge of special issues and production. And then my last job at the Post, I was the transportation and development editor. And again, all three of those jobs were really kind of very different, but it was because of my need and my desire to understand the business, and also to discover where sometimes the power was. When you think, oh, well, the power's over here with Bob Woodward and this person, that person. Yeah, they've got a kind of power, but the person over here, especially when you're depending on print, might control whether or not the story was 50 inches or 30 inches, and actually where it played inside the section. And so that was an important lesson for me to learn as well. I left the Post in 2012, I think it was, and that was a time when the Post was still, well, everything comes full circle, right, because they're still soul searching now. But that was under the Graham family ownership, and they weren't sure what their future was. The one thing that was clear to me, one of the things that I've always sort of kept in the back of my mind, including in my current job, I'm always thinking, am I continuing to learn? Am I continuing to grow? And I thought that I had probably grown as much as I could at the Post at that moment. And so I stepped away from that job, and did something else for a minute, but then I wound up at Knight Foundation. And I say it's the best thing that I ever did. Because everybody knows what Knight Foundation is, right? Yeah. So I went to work for Knight Foundation as their editorial director. And all of the preparation that I had done in accepting various parts of news, roles in news operations, had enlarged my world. Working for Knight Foundation was just like my world exploded. Because Knight Foundation doesn't just work in journalism. The arts is a huge part of what they do. City development and civic engagement is a huge part of what they do. There are 28 Knight cities around the country where they do that work. And that's often separate from their journalism. And so for me to see the interplay of all these different fields, right, I was like, how do you tie civic engagement to the journalism, to the art? How do all these things work together? And I think about it now and I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense, right? Of course all this stuff is tied together with the life of the community. But often in newsrooms, it's not something that we talk about or something that we think about. I mean, just having a chance. And then back then, Knight Foundation also worked really around the world with some of their grant making. And so one of the things that was very telling to me, there was a program in India that I was actually quite fond of. It was called Next Drop. Has anyone ever heard of this program? Next Drop was a program that a young woman in India had started, and it was text messaging based, like some of some of the stuff you all might do. But their main focus was letting people know, including government officials, when water deliveries were going to happen in villages in rural India. Now, if you don't have proper infrastructure, right, if you don't have the ability to turn on taps and have water delivered to your house, the most important information that you could receive in a given week is going to be when the water delivery is coming. And I thought, wow, I mean, we get so caught up thinking about the politics and some other things, but here, at its most basic level, this is demonstrating the importance of news and information. And so that was something that was just, I've always kept that in the back of my mind. Knight Foundation exposed me, like I said, to this entire broad world. I went from Knight Foundation to help run the JSK Fellowship at Stanford University. I was one of the managing directors there, which again, because of their focus both in the US and internationally, really keyed me into a lot of things that were happening in journalism in places that I hadn't thought about, right? I mean, like what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in Bulgaria and other places. And then I had a friend of mine who had been one of the managing editors at the Washington Post asked me to come help him run the San Francisco Chronicle. And so I was like, okay, I'll create my job. So I created a job at the Chronicle where I was in charge of diversity, but I was also in charge of newspaper operations. I oversaw a range of coverage, including business, labor, workforce development, housing, homelessness, things that were absolutely critical in San Francisco and to the Chronicle's operations. And then one day I got a call from a headhunting firm wanting to know if I was interested in the API job. And you know, being curious and just sort of open, well, actually, truth be told, my first reaction was no. I'm not. I'm quite happy. You know, I created a job. I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing. And I don't think I said this last year, but I can say this. I actually, they had hired me at the San Francisco Chronicle with the idea that I would be the next editor-in-chief. And so I had that in my mind. I was like, no, I pretty much have a plan here. But they were persistent. And I really saw an opportunity at API. API has been around since 1946, originally founded at the Columbia Journalism School in New York, was headquartered there for a while. It has always had a mission to train journalists at every stage of their career to stay abreast of the latest things happening in the industry. So even in 1946, that was part of the mission. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought about the moment we were in, right? This was following the murder of George Floyd, and the fact that we need to be paying more attention to issues of culture, identity, inclusion, belonging. And I thought if I could take this organization that's almost 80 years old and help bring it into the 21st century in a way that's meaningful and create what I hope is some lasting change, that would be a sort of a culmination of a lot of the things that I've done. And so here I am. And today is actually my 2-year anniversary of being at API. And we have, late last year, we completed a total rebranding of API, new logo, new messaging, and everything that really sort of sets the stage for the importance of issues like culture and inclusion and community engagement and trust, civic discourse and democracy, and really not forgetting the place that media needs to play at the center of American life. You know, we think a lot about why you might have gone into this business, but for me, it just comes back to this. You know, we're enshrined in the Constitution. We're enshrined in the Constitution because for all of their faults, and they had many, the founding fathers knew that accurate information, the free flow of information, was actually what George Mason called one of the bulwarks of liberty. Without it, democratic institutions can fail. And so how do we ensure that we uphold one of the bulwarks of liberty? At API, that's one of the things that I'm trying to do and that we're committed to doing, because it matters if you and your neighbors and the people in your communities have the information they need to make good decisions. If they don't have that information, if they don't have access to the news they need, our neighborhoods will fall, our communities will fall, our country will fall. And I'm here just trying to put up the good fight. So.
What an impressive career journey. And when I think about it, I guess I'm wondering, what was your early advisory committee? What did it look like? And now at this level that you're at, looking out at the vast horizon, what is it the same group of people, or is it a different configuration?
Yeah. You know, I think about the conversation we had just the other day where I was thinking, when I think about having an advisory committee for your life, I want to be very clear, this is a different group than your running buddies or your supporters or whatever, because we all need those, right? And we all have different circles and different groups. Your advisory committee for your life needs to change with you, right? I mean, as you get older and as your jobs change and as the industries change, it needs to evolve. Because one of the things you will discover is that you're changing and you're evolving, and the conversations that you have need to change. But one of the most important things at any moment in your life is you need to look around at what's happening around you, what's happening in the industry, what's happening in communities, and say, how do I avoid missing things? How do I avoid being in my own echo chamber with people who are all like me, who all have the same types of jobs that I do, who are the same age that I am? How can I ensure that I have a range of well-informed people providing me with information that will enable me to make good decisions? So my advisory committee has changed throughout my life, because what I needed when I was 23 and what I needed when I was 30 and what I need now that I'll be 55 this year. What I need now that I'm, actually, just a quick aside. So I was at the dentist on Monday, and you all are probably like, he's an old man. But no, I was talking to the dentist, and she was like, oh yeah, you have a cavity that looks like it's coming in and might need to be filled and that sort of thing. And I said, look, I haven't had cavities most of my life. I'll be 55. I'm due. And she was like, 55? She was like, oh my goodness, you look great. I'm like, anyway. But your needs change. And so the people, it doesn't mean that you always have turnover in this advisory group. But you don't need people telling you the same thing throughout your life, because the same thing doesn't apply. And you need to have an awareness. For example, who's a reporter? So a lot of people are reporters. So if you're a reporter and you're covering government or whatever, finance, cultural issues, whatever, so who are you talking to who's telling you about the financial side of the business, about what's happening not just in nonprofit news, but what's happening in commercial media? Who are you talking to who's telling you about what's happening in broadcast if you're in print or on the website, or if you have a podcast? Who are you talking to sort of across the barricades who you can trust to give you a clear-eyed view of what the industry looks like and what's happening? Because it's very easy, right, to sort of listen to the crowd and hear things that are happening and have an opinion that says, oh, that's horrible, et cetera, et cetera. But is that an informed opinion, right? I have the benefit now. I talk to a lot of people. My advisory board it's very diverse. Both in terms of age, both in terms of the positions people hold, because I don't want to miss anything. Because it's easy. One of the things, especially I learned at this stage of my career, people don't want to tell me things, especially people who work for me, because they don't want me to be disappointed. And so being able to have people who I can depend on to tell me things, right, no matter where they are in the business, or even if I'm looking at something wrong and say, hey, you might want to think about this in a different way, is very useful. I mean, one of the members of I consider a member of my advisory board, is my now 28-year-old great niece named Darian, because the insight that she provides me about how she uses media as a mother of 4 kids who's also a working nurse, and how she uses media and how it plays into her life is totally different from people I know who are 10 years older and 20 years older and 30 years older. And the ability to sort of tune into what she's doing in a very real way inform some of the decisions that I make. And so just having that type of diversity is good. I mean, the other example I will give that I think is very relevant, and I'll say this publicly, I don't have a problem with this. I mean, like for example, if you were a person last year who went to work for the Messenger, who was your advisory board, and was there anyone on your advisory board telling you that wasn't a good idea? But because I can assure you, in my circles, we were all looking at their model going, this makes no sense, and people should not go do this. Now, and that doesn't mean that your advisory board will always be right, but you most certainly should have access to a broad range of information that can help you make decisions about your lives and your careers. So,
another thing I take from hearing you talk about your career is people came to you. They saw a set of experiences, a range of expertise, a reputation in the business or in the industry. You were never sort of like, I got to be laser focused and I got to go work for the Washington Post one day and I want to be CEO of AP. So tell us a little bit about how that difference between setting those kinds of goals versus focusing on building your brand or your reputation.
yeah, so I mean, and I owe this to my parents. I mean, I've always focused on the work. I have never been one who was concerned about the awards or being out in front or anything like that. And even though, you know, when I was an editor of the magazine, Gene Weingarten won 2 feature Pulitzers that I helped work on. But those aren't things that I talk about because I focus on the work. And what I have found in focusing on the work is that you do build a reputation. And people will come to you in times of need. And I have honestly, the only time that, especially in the last 30 years, that I have ever really sought out a job, and it was a funny situation, was the job at Knight Foundation. Because I decided that I wanted to do something that had more sweep than what I had been doing at the Washington Post. And I sent Andy Sherry, do you know Andy Sherry? Andy Sherry, he was VP of Communications at Knight Foundation. Used to work at the Center for American Progress. And I sent him a note one day saying, this is who I am, and I'd love to come work for Knight Foundation if there was something there. And he sent me a letter back saying, I don't have anything, but give me a minute. And so a month later, he sends me an email that says, here's a link, apply for this job. And I applied for that job, and then 3 months later, I was in Miami doing that job. And that's the only time when I really sort of sought something out. But almost every other occasion, it has been people coming to me who saying, I don't know you, but I know you by reputation. And I'll quote my friend Emilio Garcia Ruiz, who's still the editor-in-chief at the San Francisco Chronicle. He hired me, I was an editor of the magazine at the Washington Post. Emilio hired me to be transportation and development editor, which was very different from what I was doing. But one day I'm sitting there down in the magazine area, and my phone rings, and it's Emilio, and he was like, can you come up to my office? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And we had never met at that point, I don't think. So I go up there, and he was like, and I think he was like, who are you? And I was like, well, I'm a guy just doing stuff. He was like, but he kept asking people who he should have for this job, and everyone would tell him, you need to talk to Michael Bolden. Because Michael gets shit done. That was the language that he used. And he had some projects that he wanted led, that he wanted things to get done. And I had the reputation of doing that. And that's not to say you don't tout your accomplishments or things like that, but really focusing on the work and being adaptable and being authentic and having people just see the value of you works better than almost anything. There are people who do both, who shine brightly and they do the work, There are people who shine brightly who, frankly, I wouldn't hire to park my car. But I'm just a person who's always believed in letting the work speak for you. And frankly, if I go back to being a 13-year-old working on Opus, which was my high school newspaper, and if you had told me then that, in 30 plus years, I'd be running something called the American Press Institute, going all over speaking to people, and I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see how I get there, but here I am.
Well, thank you for everything that you just said. I was just thinking about, the fact that you have made different jumps in your career. And I'm wondering, what factors did you take into consideration? Like, for example, for me, I've been at the same place for 5 years, and I'm at that point of, do I jump or do I stay in the same place? And so what were the factors that you thought of?
Yeah. So I'll go back to one of the things I said. Am I still learning? Is there still the possibility of learning, right? And frankly, if the answer to that question starts to be no, well, then you really have to start weighing what you're going to do. I mean, it's funny. Emilio actually factors that. So Emilio is the person who's a part of my advisory board. And I can remember actually asking him when I was weighing this decision about whether or not I was going to leave the post. And I went to him and I said, this is what I think I see. I see an organization that is conflicted, that doesn't know what its future is. People are making bad decisions. And I feel the weight of that. And I said, am I wrong? And he was like, no. He was like, you're not wrong. He was like, your assessment of this situation is correct. And so that's a place where the advisory board comes into play again. One of the things that I think about, especially in this landscape too, is sort of the diversity that exists in terms of types of media and what they are covering and how they are doing it. And frankly, I'd be looking around and would be thinking, are there things that appeal to me that I have not explored? Are there opportunities? And again, I don't want to pick on you, but like I said, Lauren Williams and what you all are doing at Capital B News is one of the things that I think is just fantastic. And so seeing things like that, or the 19th, I think Angelique Shaw was here. Right, I moderated a panel with her last year down in Charlottesville, and seeing stuff like that just gets me excited. And one of the things I start wondering, now I wonder, how can I work with those people? How can we help them? Or that sort of thing. But depending on where I was in my career, I'd be very curious about opportunities at some of these organizations, because they really are the frontier in many respects. And I come back to this thing where I think it's increasingly important to center community in what you do. Now, the communities can be very different, right? I mean, the 19th and Capital B News, they have very specific communities that they serve. PBS NewsHour actually has very specific communities that they serve. But how are you serving communities, and is there a way to do it deeper, frankly, is the question that I always ask. So.
Hello, my name is Olivia. I'm a business reporter at the Courier-Journal.
Merva Bespin used to be the editor there, right?
Not while I have been there.
Yeah, no, this was,
okay.
trust me,
It's
this
like,
is
that.
No, yeah, this is a long time ago. So.
Okay, sorry, that name does not ring a bell for me. But as an early career journalist, when thinking about crafting my own advisory group, what is a recommendation that you would have in regards to about how many folks we should look at having on our advisory board, and what are some key characteristics or traits that we should look for in identifying the individuals who would be good for our advisory board?
So you don't want a group that's too big, frankly. I mean, I think 5 or 6 people is probably ideal. I think having people who are both inside your specific industry, so legacy news organizations making the transition, that's important. But more important is having people who are also outside of it, right? Having people who are outside of your age group. Because frankly, this is true of my age group too, right? If I have all Gen Xers around me telling me and let me tell you, us Gen Xers, we can all think the same thing a lot of the time. But having people who sort of cut across generations and experience is important. I would have people who were both in similar sized communities and different sized communities, frankly. I think that those would all be characteristics. You want people who, from your viewpoint, from what you can tell, are very clear out about how they view life, right? Who have very clear expectations around themselves, who aren't wolves in sheep's clothing, frankly, who might be trying to bring you down. And actually, I'm going to give her credit in a minute of this. One of the most important members of your advisory board is yourself. And how you view yourself and having a clear-eyed view of your abilities and what you think are some of your goals at heart. You know, I think back to Niecy Nash. Did everybody see her video when she said, you know, she was thanking people when she got the Emmy and that sort of thing, and she was like, and you know what? I want to thank myself. And I was like, wait! I got up, I off the sofa. I'm like, that's fantastic, because at the end of the day, no one knows the work that you've put in, or what some of your fears are, what some of your aspirations are, better than yourself. So I will say the most important member of your advisory board is a clear-eyed view that you have of yourself. But those are some of the traits and some of the things. Is that helpful? Yes. I hope. Yeah.
Go to Caroline.
Yeah, I
we'll
want to play that video again because that was great. I mean, because people never do that. That was fantastic.
Hi, my name is Caroline Colvin. I am a DI reporter at HR Dive. I think one of my questions is moving from beat to beat, having a lot of different passions.
Yep.
Sometimes I get kind of self-conscious about the fact that I've switched beats. So I'm a labor reporter now, and then before that I was a reproductive health reporter. And sometimes I wonder if it's going to be seen as flighty or something. But I think I'm just trying to understand, how do you kind of lean into the fact that you have diverse interests and you're able to cover more than one thing, as opposed to that being seen as a knock against you?
Oh, I think that makes you extremely valuable. All right. I mean, like I said, look at my career. I've done everything from, edit stories like one of the Jane Weingarten stories about babies being left in car seats in hot cars, to interviewing David Copperfield or Bob Hope, who you all may not know who Bob Hope was. But I think that that's actually always been one of the best things about this business, is the ability to be nimble and cover a variety of topics. I think that trait and that ability is something that we will always need. I would lean into it. I mean, and I would even celebrate it on my resume and that sort of thing, and talk about how you're able to be nimble. I mean, one of the things that, and I assume they're still teaching this to some degree. I mean, but one of the things that we used to always talk about was how you could become an expert on something, really, really fast, right? And I think about me. I was hired to be transportation and development editor at the Washington Post, and the only thing I really knew about transportation was riding Metro 45 minutes in from Prince George's County at the time. But I tell you what, by the time I left the Washington Post, no one knew transportation and development better than I did. So I don't see that as a negative. I would celebrate it. I would lean into it. So.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Fernanda Figueroa. I'm from the Austin American Statesman, and kind of backing up what she was saying about building an advisory board, because we're early career journalists, and sometimes we have to move just because the way the industry is. But how do you build that board without, kind of the innate competitiveness that is with other early career journalists, and knowing whether or not to trust them to ask them this question that would have you moving, and then with older journalists, whether or not they're going to tell on you when you don't want your editors to know you're considering leaving.
Yeah, so I mean, you really have to vet people. Don't give your trust lightly. My mom basically taught me not to trust anyone. And so that's always in the back of my mind. But it also made me a good reporter, right? Because I'm skeptical about everything. So do your due diligence on people. If somebody can't be trusted, other people are going to be talking about that. I mean, don't tell everybody your business at the get-go. I mean, this takes a while to develop people that you're going to trust and who are going to trust you. But yeah, be very cautious at first because sometimes, well, like I said earlier, right, there are people who have motives that are not always in your best interest, and you do need to be on guard against those. But I think that with time, there definitely comes the expertise of being able to suss out who's genuine and who's not, whose advice is of value and whose is not. But yeah, be cautious, be skeptical, be good journalists in doing this. I mean, because essentially, as you put together an advisory board, you're reporting. That's you're reporting out the efficacy of all these people and their opinions and how they apply to your lives, and that's going to change constantly, right? So it's not something that becomes static. You may reach a point where you realize some people have become part of this advisory board and it wasn't intentional. I think about Emilio now, and at this point, I wouldn't make a move without talking to Emilio. But at this point, it's been 14 years, and he's proven that he's trustworthy. And if I'm full of crap, he'll tell me that I'm full of crap. If he thinks something's great, he'll tell me that. So.
Mine isn't exactly about an advisory committee, but I am curious, since you've moved and done this so many times.
Were you Michigan
I'm
Radio?
Brianna Rice, Michigan Radio, sorry.
Okay, yeah.
Keep forgetting. But my question is about how you built community every time you moved and kind of learned about these spaces that you had never been to, right? You'd never been to DC, and then you got there and started doing that. So can you talk a little bit about literally how you do that work of being a good journalist when you're jumping around a lot?
Yeah, I mean, you really have to, you have to put in the work, right? I mean, you can't just move to a place and expect everything is just going to fall, it's just going to fall in line for you. That's just not the way things work. Nowadays, for example, if you are here in Washington, for example, living, one of the first things I would do if I moved to a place like Washington is connect with all the embassies. So you have to sort of learn where the communities exist in the places that you're going to. And one of the things, as I mentioned the embassies, because one of the things that happens here is that there are all of these social activities that are open to the public that happen around almost all the embassies here. There are dances and concerts and parties and all this kind of stuff that a lot of people don't know about. And so finding things like that and immersing yourself in that and just going to neighborhoods sometimes and exploring and farmers markets and street fairs and that sort of thing will really help you learn about places. One of the things that I'm also a big fan of, especially since we're all journalists in this room, when you go to a place, what does your asset map look like? Who knows what an asset map is? So asset mapping is a term that actually comes from community development, where if you're trying to understand a place, you go to the place and you find out, so what are the organizations that matter? Let's say you're going to go to, I live in Falls Church, Virginia. So you go to Falls Church, Virginia, and you're like, okay, so my asset map of Falls Church, what are the significant churches? What are the significant rec centers? Is there a library where people gathers? Who are the people, right? Who are the voices that people listen to in those areas? Is there a farmer's market? Is there a parade? Just doing some reporting around what the community life of a place looks like provides you tons of entry points to understanding how things function and where you should insert yourself, both socially, right, as you're trying to build a life in a place, but secondly, that can also inform your reporting in general. One of the things that I talked a little bit about is that I absolutely believe that journalists should be at the center of community life. And so asset mapping and understanding what that looks like in a place is one of the keys, I think, to unlocking what you're talking about. And I've done it, I lived in New Orleans, I'm Fort Walton Beach, lived in Miami twice, spent 5 years in California, now I'm back in DC, and I've done some form of that in almost every place. And sometimes it's more successful than others, but it really does give you a starting point. And one of the things that I like about places, I like to be surprised. And so one of the questions I always ask about a place, what are the things that will surprise me that I don't know about? And I'll sometimes just ask people those questions. And that can actually steer you in some interesting directions. So.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Aditi. I work for CNN.
Okay.
I was very happy to hear your response to Caroline's question about how it's valuable when you see that someone's done several different, reporting jobs and beats. My question, since you've been so specific and I really have enjoyed that, I'd love to hear a little more about what your recommendation is in terms of selling that, how that makes sense. If you're going from X beat to Y beat and it's super new, or what are the skills that I should take, and what would make sense to whoever you're trying to pitch it to.
Yeah, so it depends on what you're trying to do, right? But the adaptability and the ability to be authentic in the adaptability, I most certainly in television news is something that's of great value. As specific as you can be about your examples is important, right? So if we're talking about jumping from beat to beat, it's not just jumping from beat to beat for the sake of jumping to beat. It's being able to show the depth that you were able to master something on that beat, right? So if you were doing financial reporting and then you did a great story on banking regulations and you were able to show some impact, and then you did some sort of cultural story maybe on the impact of health disparities or something, being able to show that range, right? And that's something, it's not just a surface range, right? It's like you're actually able to demonstrate mastery of the subject. And I think that that's the important thing. So when you talk about the examples or you're putting together your reel, being able to show the mastery of those different topics is something that's important. And that's the common thread, right? It isn't the topics itself. It's your ability to master things and to come off as a professional no matter what the topics are. So.
One more question.
Okay, so I'm Sarah Elbishbishi. I cover energy and environment in West Virginia.
Okay. You're with what?
Mountain State Spotlight.
Oh, I love Mountain State Spotlight. There's great stuff in West Virginia too. Black by God, Mountain State Spotlight.
Yeah. I
There's
just say
great
that
stuff
because I feel like people don't Mountain State
Yeah.
So
Reed College of Media.
yeah.
Yeah. Dana Quester. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot there. So thank you for being here, and thank you. You've been really specific and in answering the questions, which is really, really helpful. And if you've touched upon this a little bit, but in terms of finding your advisory group, I'm wondering if if you can kind of walk us through maybe specific avenues or ideas to kind of in search of individuals that we might consider adding, or kind of how we would approach a conversation with someone that we'd want to obviously wouldn't go up and be like, hey, can you be part of this group? But how you kind of walk, if you could potentially walk us through that a little bit, because I think especially for folks who don't live in major cities or opportunities where there's networking, or people who didn't go to J school, or people who feel like they got there later in the game, how you approach those conversations. I know folks say if you reach out to a journalist, randomly cold call them, they'll be really susceptible to that.
Not necessarily. I would never tell you that.
Right. So, but that's those are things that I've heard over the years, and so I think you have really good insight, and I'd love for an example like that.
Yeah. So so taking advantage of opportunities where you're more likely to get yeses than nos, and you're not so. When you first start thinking about this, your ask isn't to be part of my advisory board, right? Your ask is to, for thoughts on X, Y, or Z. Very specific, very limited, very humble, right? And if you're in your situation, because of who you are, even starting with something like this is useful, because you actually all have a leg up, because all of these people have put in time to come talk to you. And whereas Wesley Lauer is not going to be on everybody's advisory board, he might be willing to provide information here and there. So that's how you start, right? And you smartly follow up every once in a while. You put in the work. Like if someone reaches out to me and then reaches out to me again with a very specific ask, and again, the specificity is important, right? And making people aware that you value their expertise and their position as an authority is important, right? Not that it's about you, but to some degree that it's about them and their view of the world. And when you have these interactions with people, what are you doing to leave an impression, right? I think about one of the fellows last year, and actually if she reached out to me, I would most certainly help. The young woman from ABC 10 in Sacramento. But she was a fellow last year, and the reason why she sticks in my mind is because we gave them a grant, and she used that grant to make a use case to her bosses, which then led to something else and something else. And so she sticks in my mind because of that. So what are you doing to actually stick in the minds of people who you think might play this role in your life, right? And sometimes it's, again, like what we were talking about, demonstrating your mastery of something and making people a little invested in your success. Because, again, I wish I could think of her name, but I keep thinking about that example. And I'm like, I want her to succeed. And so people will become invested in you and in your success. And again, making sure that your ask is authentic, that you are authentic is critical, right? Because I like to think at this point, I know when people are full of it. And frankly, I'm not going to waste my time with people who I think are full of it. So the authenticity is one of the most important things you can preserve throughout your career, your authenticity and your genuineness for the job and for being you. So,
Sabrina Sanchez.
Yeah, Sabrina. Yeah.
Listen, I think the most powerful thing you have shared with us in your presentation, out of many, is the fact that you said you've only applied for really the one position.
Yeah.
I have sought throughout my career to simply do work that matters, to, as our earlier speaker, Anjali, said, align myself with my values, and whatever position that I take is something that I'm believe in.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about a rise up a career ladder based on solely building a strong, solid toolkit, Michael Bolden is the living proof of that. He has shown us that doing work that matters to you, building your skill set, building your expertise, being authentic is the key. So I'm very grateful for this presentation, and I want us all to show Michael our gratitude for being here. So thank you so much for